When are we ever gonna get this yard mowed?
Oh, snap. You know, there's only one person out here in the deep woods, North Florida, that's qualified to perform this type of work. See my resume? That tractor over there, that John Deere, well, it's got engine problems. I've done everything I possibly can to this to ensure it ran. It ran when I let Tammy drive it, but then she ran out of gas, and then I went over there to try to get it started, and then it didn't run. So it must have broke down on her while she was driving it. I had no fire. I had to replace the coil again. No fire. I replaced the ignition switch. No fire. I replaced the spark plug. I finally got it to run a little bit here and there, and I was able to actually get a little bit mowed here, and a little bit mowed there, and a little bit more over there, but I just couldn't manage to keep it running. It would keep bogging down. Come to find out, I'm probably gonna have to tear the engine down or at least pull the heads off to see if I got a stuck valve. But over the course of time, as I was discussing all these issues with my dad, he came up with the bright idea to come over and pick up this piece of junk and get it out of his yard. He managed to find him another piece of junk, and it didn't fire, and he got it running, right? And I guess it looked better than this one because he worked on it and replaced this and that and the other and got it running up and doing a good job for him. But he told me if I didn't come get this, he was going to call somebody and have it hauled to the junkyard. All right, so I bring this tractor over to the house. Camper out here in the deep woods in North Florida. And so I said, okay, well, what's the deal? What's going on with this lawn tractor? I talked to him. He said it ran great. He said it did just fine, but it had some issues. And so I said, well, what is it? He says it's not firing. Okay, well, I get it over here. I'm holding these for a reason. And I turned the ignition key. Ignition key was free. Ignition key turned like it wasn't turning anything. No click, no nothing. Just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So I said, okay, well, it needs an ignition switch. So I got the ignition switch. I put that in. Well, I turned it. Nothing happened. Couldn't figure out what the deal was there. So I lifted up the seat and looked down to see if there was an issue with maybe the seat safety switch. Well, the wires were just, apart and hanging up underneath. And he goes, well, I couldn't never get it started with the wires connected. I never had the wires connected. And so I connected them and I couldn't get it to start. Well, I pushed the clutch down and it still didn't work. So I said, well, how do you get this thing started? What'd you do before? He says, I just hooked a jumper cable to the positive on the battery and jump started the starter. Okay. That bypasses all the switches. So I did that. I got it started a few times. But then, you know, things kept going wrong over time. I didn't, the carburetor in and of itself leaked and drained all the fuel out of the gas tank and into the crankcase. I tried to turn the motor over and it was spitting gas out the exhaust. So I called my dad up and I said, this thing's spitting gas out the exhaust. He says, yeah, you got to turn the gas valve off. Okay, never heard of that one before. He says, it does it all the time. He says, I've replaced the carburetor, but it still did it. I pulled the carburetor apart and I rebuilt the new one that I put on there and put it back on, and it still didn't do it. So you got to shut the gas valve off. That's the only way you're ever going to keep the gas from leaking into the crankcase. So that happened to me like 3 times, and I said, okay, enough's enough. So I did a little bit of digging and come to find out that this carburetor right here, you know, it has a fuel solenoid on it, you know, shut off, operates with the key. Well, the ignition didn't work, right? So how is the solenoid for the carburetor supposed to work? Well, I replaced the ignition switch and still didn't work. Still leaked fuel down into the crankcase. And so I did a little digging, a little bit more research, and I found out that the type of carburetors that they put on these Briggs & Stratton engines, they're called Nickeys, N-I-K-K-I. And the Nickey carburetor, from what I understand, has major issues. And only about 50% of the carburetors aftermarket that you buy to put on these motors are effective or work. And there's a lot of problems with these flooding and, you know, causing issues with the performance of the engine. So I found out that a Walbro carburetor, which is made just the same, and you can't really notice any difference in them, is built a little bit different. And the success rate on those carburetors functioning are like at 99%. So what I did is I got the carburetor, put the carburetor on it. You know, I mean, it's not very difficult. You know, you just pull the air cleaner off, unbolt the studs, a couple bolts in the top of the air cleaner. And so I yanked it off and I put on the other carburetor. All right, well, I still had issues. The key did not work. And so I did a little bit more digging and come to find out that the solenoid, from my deduction, is what the issue was. That, you know, without having to use any meter or anything like that, kind of deduce what the issue was, it wasn't real hard to figure out that this solenoid be replaced. No click, no crank. Got brand new battery. Battery runs straight to the solenoid, and when you cross the post on the solenoid, the starter would light off. For some reason, the inside of this solenoid wasn't actuating. So guess what? That means I'm putting a new solenoid on there. But I want you to look at this. Okay, now this solenoid, bad shape. Okay, it's all melted and disintegrating right here. When I tried to unbolt the lines off of it, this just crumbled off. All right, so this solenoid needed to be replaced. So I got the 4-post and I pulled the panel off and I go to set it in. There's a couple things you need to know about solenoids. One is, this is a 3-post. You know, it's got a post here. Well, it used to have one here, and it's got one right here. That makes this plate on the bottom of the ground. If you have a 4-post, which means you have the 2 top posts and the 2 posts in the front here, that means that you have to ground the additional post. So what I did is I went ahead and mounted the solenoid inside, and I put a ground wire to the left side. And when you do that, you know, you want to hook up your positive from the battery on the left side, and you want to hook up the starter on the right side of the solenoid. And then you also want to make sure that your ignition wire is attached to the solenoid, and that goes on the right side. And then after you get done doing that, I grounded the, you know, the 1 post actually to one of the bolts of the solenoid so I could get it grounded to the tractor. And you know, aside from that, you know, I put a new coil on it. You know, you should be able to put a coil on a tractor, 2 bolts. You know, you take it off, order one for it, put 2 bolts back in, put a business card, you know, push the coil up against the flywheel, tighten it up, and you're good to go, and then attach it back to spark plug. And so I guess that's about all you can do, other than maybe replacing the safety switches for the seat or for the deck. You know, you'll want to make sure that when you get everything all reassembled and you're ready to light it up, that you push the clutch pedal down before you try to start it. Oh, also make sure that the PTO is not engaged.
Now Randy's gonna make me the guinea pig. He wants to see if I can crank it, because if I can crank it, anybody can crank it, because I can't crank nothing. So let's get at it. I did it! I did